Welcome back, and to continue our focus on the WTO Ministerial meet in Nairobi, I'm now joined by Jayant Dasgupta, former India's ambassador to the WTO. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us here on The Big Picture. You heard our former Commerce Secretary Rahul Kullar say that the fact that there was no unambiguous reaffirmation of the Doha development agenda, it has tilted the balance once again in favor of the developed countries, because they will now not be obligated to sort of bring down their tariffs as far as their manufacturing sectors like textile, leather is concerned, or sort of giving into concerns of India as far as services are concerned. What's your take, sir, as far as what and what we saw in the WTO?
Dr. Kullar has made the point that without clear reaffirmation of the Doha declaration of the Doha round, we have lost out something. Of course, it is not an ideal situation, and if there had been a very clear reaffirmation, it would have been all to the good. But since there has not been a clear statement saying that the Doha round is getting closed, that it is not going to be taken forward, so I think we haven't lost everything, and the battleground will now shift to Geneva, because there is a very clear language which says that the remaining Doha issues will be taken up for negotiation. So the Doha round is not dead, it is still there. But of course, in order to reach an agreement or to negotiate, it needs the goodwill of all the sides and earnestness of all the members of the WTO.
Right.
So if that is not there, we'll probably not be able to make progress.
Right, because the point that Dr. Kullar was making, sir, was the fact that because there is no clear reaffirmation of the Doha development agenda, developed countries like US and EU can continue to give sort of market support, domestic support, to the agricultural sector, which is going to hurt the Indian agriculture or agriculture in some of the developing countries. Also, in terms of the manufacturing sector, where many of the developing countries like India have the edge, especially in terms of leather and textile, they would not be obligated to sort of bring down the tariffs are concerned. Specifically on those two issues, sir, do you think that India's position has only weakened, India and developing countries' position has only weakened without a clear reaffirmation of the DDA?
As long as the DDA doesn't get concluded, it remains on the same footing or as before. Only once it gets concluded with an agreement on slashing of domestic subsidies in agriculture and market access in NAMA, which includes textiles, leather, ceramics, and a lot of other things in which developing countries are interested. So as long as that doesn't get concluded, we remain where we were. So which means that for the past 20 years, developing countries haven't had any market access additionality. They remain where they were.
Sir, help us understand this then, Mr. Dasgupta, because it's a bit puzzling. Without a clear affirmation and without a clear affirmation as far as DDA is concerned, why then did India agree to phase out its export subsidies by 2018? Just help us understand, sir, what could have been some of the considerations that were playing on the mind of the government that perhaps we are missing here sitting in the studio?
I think I'll take you a little back in history to 2005, the Hong Kong Ministerial Declaration, the 6th Ministerial of the WTO. In that, it had been agreed upon by all parties that export subsidies would be phased out by 2013, and transport subsidies would get an additional 5 years, and those developing countries, that is, developing countries would get another 5 years for transport subsidies under Article 9.4. Now, the point is that 2013 has at least now been converted to 2015, and everybody, all developed countries will have to phase out their export subsidies, remaining export subsidies immediately, and the developing countries will have a little bit of leeway. But India, since on the 1st of January 1995, it didn't have any export subsidy programs in place, so it is not really entitled to having any transport subsidies or marketing subsidies under Article 9.4. So it is not something which is a loss to India, because it didn't have the entitlement under the WTO system.
Right. Right, fair enough. In fact, the point that Mr. Khullar made, and also many trade experts are saying, that while export subsidies is one thing, the fact of the matter is till the time developed countries do not sort of change their policies as far as giving domestic price support or domestic support is concerned, because that continues to be a factor that distorts trade. Till the time you don't deal with that, export subsidies, it's just a small thing. So that's not really sort of giving in, or the developed world is not going to lose too much by sort of deciding to stop export subsidies from 2015.
He's absolutely right. Export subsidies, in the case of the US, for instance, they have very little, if any, export subsidies still in place. And the only large user, and that too in times of low prices in the international market for export subsidies, is the European Union. And they have also, under their new program, they have been very aggressively phasing out the remaining export subsidies. So really speaking, it is of course a very welcome move to phase out export subsidies, but in real terms, it doesn't really make much of a difference, because it's already been phased out by the developed countries, and very few developing countries are entitled to have export subsidies. Absolutely,
sir. Sir, I mean, it's no secret of America's unease with the Doha development agenda. In fact, you were there when the Obama administration came to power, and we saw the delay also in appointing an ambassador to the WTO, and also thereafter, just before this conference started, Michael Froman wrote an article in the Financial Times, once again questioning Doha, saying that Doha was sort of agreed upon, at least the broader issues back in 2001, and since then, 14 years hence, the world had changed. So in that sense, I mean, India should have seen it coming. So do you feel that India should have been more prepared, that while there was a clear possibility of the developed world remaining sort of ambiguous about the commitment to DDA, countries like India should have had their own sort of issues, so that there was a clear give and take?
It's really ironical that in 2001, when the Doha round was, set in motion, India was one of the countries which opposed it till the end, the launching of a new round. And India said that all the implementation issues of the Uruguay round needed to be sorted out first, and agriculture needed to be taken up on priority before anything else. And unfortunately, a very large, complex and ambitious round was launched. And the ones who took the lead in launching that round, the European Union primarily, and the US and the other developed countries, they are now backing out. And why is that so? It is, of course, the ostensible reason given by them is that the world has changed. China has emerged as a big power in international commerce, and also along with it, the other developing countries like India. But there is a difference. There is, and we don't really agree to this analysis, because the problems of poverty, unemployment, low per capita incomes, they all remain, and more so in the case of India and the poorer developing countries.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. So we'll leave it at that there. Right. Yes, sir. Quickly make your point, sir. We'll wrap it up.
Yes. The point that I am making is that the new issues that they are trying to bring in, some of them, in fact, the more important ones, they had broached them in 1996 at the Singapore Ministerial Competition, Investment, Government Procurement. Of course, trade facilitation, the fourth one, that has already been harvested by them. So it is, old wine in a new bottle, basically, and along with some new issues as well, of course.
Right. In fact, sir, we're going to keep having this conversation, and we'll have you back also on the show. Thank you very much for joining us here, Mr. Dasgupta, on The Big Picture.